The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, January 29th, 2025. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Jackie Flynn Mogensen, reporter covering science and health at Mother Jones, on the NIH freeze. Then Elie Mystal, justice correspondent at The Nation, on Trump's DEIA edicts and lawless attack on our functioning government. Meanwhile, speaking of that attack, a federal judge blocks Trump's freeze or blanket freeze of federal funds. Meanwhile, yesterday, Medicaid and Head Start federal funding frozen for half the day, wreaking havoc. Trump team illegally solicits federal employee resignations, and Elon Musk's interns seem to be running the federal government Office of Personnel Management. Trump fires all Democratic commissioners on the Equal Opportunity Commission, leaving that commission inoperable, just like he did with the National Labor Relations Board. Trump ends federal support for health care for trans minors and then redefines minors to include 18-year-olds. Trump is to sign an executive order to promote private and parochial schools through the Education Department. And the Trump administration revokes temporary protected status for hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans, coincidentally after his failed coup attempt from 7 years ago. And remember that flight to Colombia that Colombia sent back? Colombia says not one of the 200 Colombians, including over 20 children deported by Trump, were criminals. Lastly, some tiny good news. Democrats flipped the Iowa State Senate seat, which is a plus 21 Republican seat. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Wednesday, hump day. It feels like really Friday, like from 4 weeks from now, based upon the first 3 days of this week. Emma is out today, and she'll be back tomorrow. We've got a lot to talk about. We have things have moved so quickly that we have basically had to tell our guests, like, oh, we need to add X, Y, and Z.
We should start doing 2 live shows a day.
Honestly.
Evening edition.
We're going to do the, well, how many hours a day does Hassan stream? Now we understand the whole thing makes sense.
Yep.
Don't threaten Sam with a good time.
Exactly.
Eat on stream.
A lot to discuss, but one of the major points that we've been making here really well before the election was how much easier it is to, when your agenda is essentially to destroy government's functions, than it is to make government work and to structure policies that work and work seamlessly and flawlessly, or even just, fairly well. I keep using the metaphor of doing demo in an apartment. You take a sledgehammer in there, and yeah, occasionally you may hit something that's structural, but you don't care. And I think this applies well to what happened yesterday. I don't know, and I don't know if anybody knows. And I don't even know if we can even say, like, did the Trump administration mean to shut down Medicaid? Did it mean to shut down Head Start? I don't even know if you can say, you can define Trump administration. It's quite possible that someone in the Trump administration didn't mean to do it, and someone else in the Trump administration did. It's also quite possible that they just don't care at the end of the day, because all of this is going to end up in court. And what they want to do is anything that is going to sever the relationship between people who get something out of government, which is just about everybody. We didn't see like the SEC essentially say, oh, we're just not going to pay attention to insider trading or anything like this today. But they want to sever this relationship. People who are receiving Medicaid and thought that was, or Medicaid providers, they don't sit there and go, oh, well, this was just a glitch. I'm going to continue to take Medicaid without any anxiety. People who have, who work for Head Start, daycares, they're not saying to themselves, this is just a glitch. I don't have to worry about it. I mean, would you blame these people if they're going out and looking for new jobs today? The stress that was associated with parents.
Or trauma, as Russ Vought says.
Exactly. The plan is to traumatize federal workers. And why not traumatize, frankly, anybody who is not working directly for the federal government, but getting funds that allow their work to continue, whether it's in your community, whether it's in, in your community, in your city, in your town, in your state, wherever. So the chaos is not distinct from whatever their policy is, because their policy is to wreak chaos. And it's not to wreak chaos in markets. They're not looking to wreak chaos,
on Wall Street.
On Wall Street. They're looking to wreak chaos. And of course, are a lot of these people their voters? Without a doubt. But do I think that people who voted for Kamala Harris or people who voted for Donald Trump have the same, savviness as, I think they have more or less the same savviness to understand what happened. They just know all of a sudden, like, their doctor was freaking out, or the people who run their Head Start program were freaking out. I mean, that's not to mention all the other agencies. We're going to be talking about the NIH freeze that took place 2 or 3 days ago. People going in to get cancer treatment. Not anymore. Some people will understand the relationship between this, and others won't. But this is all about the Impoundment Control Act and Donald Trump setting the table to go to the 6-3 handpicked Supreme Court and have them essentially say, yes, you have a line item veto. And not in the process of the budget, but even after the fact. Stuff that has been settled in our country for 50 years. I mean, settled. Not conjecture. Settled by a court case, Train v. New York City, settled by the passage of a statute to make sure that it was really clear, the 1974 Impoundment Control Act. And then the Constitution also talks about Congress appropriating funds. And if that's Congress's job, the president doesn't have the authority to decide unilaterally, it doesn't comport with my idea what the country should look like. Here's Fox and friends running around, just making it like this was a whoops-a-daisy. Whoops-a-daisy. They're all smiling. None of them are worried about it.
There's people in this programs. They found out that there are 441 federal agencies on the Federal Register. 75 are actually obsolete agencies that are just existing people writing checks. There's $2.5 billion.
What does that mean? They found out that these agencies are obsolete? What? The size of the U.S. government relative to the population hasn't changed in at least half a century. The government, in terms of like personnel, has increased, but commensurate with the population. This is all just BS to justify and explain to their rubes, hey, you know why your pharmacy is going to close down in rural Iowa? Because the Medicaid payments that half of you are using to get your prescriptions, they didn't come through.
Buildings that are totally empty. So this is what Elon Musk and his group are doing, and what Trump knew going in that he was going to do. What they have to do is do things like this, communicate ahead of time. Giving you till September, as opposed to yesterday when we get the story out that all federal funding is frozen except for Social Security and Medicare. And then they expanded and said, anybody who's getting regular payments, that's not you. We're looking at programs. Right. But that, it's until 2 o'clock.
This is something I think that people should be aware of. When you get payments from the federal government, there is someone who works at the program that issues those payments. So there's a lot of people who are not going to get their payments. They're not going to get their payments to pay for their employees at a daycare center. They're not going to get their payments to pay for drugs. Go ahead.
In regular payments, that's not you. We're looking at programs. Right. But that, it took till 2 o'clock in the afternoon to do that.
To flush it out.
I think, communication is going to be the key. And they always say the first 2 months of an administration and the last 2 months are the most difficult. And this is an example of it yesterday. But when Carolyn Leavitt took the stage yesterday at 27 years old,
incredible,
as a press secretary.
Without a notebook.
Without a notebook. You mean maybe that's where, when she came up with the idea that we gave $50 million worth of condoms to Gaza, she came up, that was completely off the top of her head. She didn't have a scriptwriter for that, because that was hilarious. You know what they used to call the first 2 months of an administration? The honeymoon period. They never said the first 2 months are the hardest. I never heard that. I never heard that in my 20 years doing this. But since we're talking about Elon Musk, we'll talk more about the offer, in quotes, they have made to federal employees, because they're trying to reduce it like they did with Twitter. Wired has done some digging into the Office of Personnel Management that has been sort of orchestrating this. Of course, this also comes from the Office of Budget Management, that Russell Vought is presumably going to take over. But the Office of Personnel Management are the ones who have, who basically are the HR for government. And they're the ones apparently who have orchestrated this offer to federal workers. The entire place apparently has been staffed with Musk people or Mark Andreessen people. The managing partner at Andreessen Horowitz is Trump's nominee at the OPM, a former engineer and director of operations for the Las Vegas Loop at the Boring Company, which is just a scam.
A big giant scam.
Is a senior advisor to the director at OPM. Steve Davis, the CEO of the Boring Company, is rumored to be advising Musk on cuts to be made via Doge. According to same sources, the people at the top of the new OPM food chain include 2 people with apparent software engineering backgrounds whom Wired is not naming because of their ages. Which is what? Do they have minors working there? And now we know that minors are now not just, it's been raised a year by the Trump. One is a senior advisor to the director. And incidentally, look out for these software engineers, because what's happening is here they're going to apply AI and algorithms to who they're going to try and get rid of in the federal government. One senior advisor to the director is a 21-year-old whose online resume touts his work for Palantir. That is the government contractor and analytics firm, spying agency, private spying agency.
Yeah. Private CIA.
Co-founded by billionaire Peter Thiel. Thiel, of course, is the mentor of J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is his protege. I don't think J.D. Vance, aside from his book, and he probably was getting funds from Thiel while he was writing his book, for that matter, but at least in terms of on paper, I don't think J.D. Vance has ever had a paid job that wasn't in some way coming from Peter Thiel money.
Assistant to venture capitalists.
The other, who won't be named, because all they're doing is wrecking our country, our government right now, from a paid position in our government, but they're so young. The other, who reports directly to Scales, graduated from high school in 2024. Now, I don't think he's or she is in college, or they are in college. They might be, but juggling the personnel of the federal government and freshman year is tough. They sometimes say like the first semester at college is difficult. Yeah, so that might be, now maybe this person's doing it on their Christmas break from college, their freshman year, or, you know, they graduated high school in 2024 and let's see, a mirrored copy of an online resume and his high school, I guess it's a he, his high school student magazine, he lists his jobs as, camp counselor and a bicycle mechanic among his professional experiences. Now, listen, back in the day, I used to fix some 3-speed bikes. I made a little cash that way. I'm not knocking it. But I don't know that that would qualify me for my next job to be human resources for the entire federal government.
Leave some time for activities.
He had a summer role at Neuralink, Musk's brain-computer interface company.
The chimp abusing operation.
And then you got some other stuff. People came from the National Rifle Association, Noah Peters, who was a writer at the Daily Caller and the Federalist. I mean, for those of us old enough to remember the Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq, when Heritage Foundation was sending over, 21-year-olds to run a recently destroyed country. We know how this works out. But the problem here is there is no bad outcome for the Trump administration and the Republicans when they're putting people in who can't even do the basic functioning of government. That is not a bug. It is a feature. They were laughing about what happened to Medicaid. They were laughing about what happened to Head Start. They don't care. They know they have 2 years to wreak as much havoc as they can. And they're going to take every single day and they're going to do it. Later, we'll talk about the completely insufficient response by our so-called Democratic leadership. I mean, laughable. I mean, not laughable. It actually is like far more depressing than that. But we will get to that shortly. In the meantime, we will also be talking to Jackie Flynn Mogensen, reporter covering science and health at Mother Jones, to tell us what the hell is going on at the NIH. And then Elie Mystal will be here, justice correspondent at The Nation, to tell us what the hell is going on with everything else. First, a word from our sponsors. Oh, Kelly was here back when Nutrafol first wanted to sponsor the program, and you know the story about that, where it's a lot of internal communications is who might use it. It didn't happen. People don't appreciate me talking about Michael in that way, but I think Michael would enjoy it, or at least he would appreciate the fact that I was doing it. So we had some around, and a couple of years ago, I started to take it because I was feeling like I was thinning a little bit. And I don't have that many assets to offer, and I wanted my hair to stay as it was. Turns out your hair is much more than what you see when you look in the mirror. Stress, nutrition, hormones, lifestyle, all of these internal factors affect what you see on the outside. Nutrafol has science-backed whole-body approach to nourish growth from within and achieve your best hair yet. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand trusted by over 1 million people. You will see a thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. And thinning hair, different for men and women. One-size-fits-all approach to hair growth doesn't cut it. Nutrafol has multiple formulas for men and women that are tailored to different life stages, such as postpartum or menopause or just being old like myself. Lifestyle factors might influence it as well, like if you're a plant-based lifestyle, so you can get just what you need. It is physician-formulated, 100% drug-free ingredients. Nutrafol supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting key root causes of thinning. Stress, hormones, aging, nutrition, lifestyle, metabolism through whole body health. Most supplements rely on ingredient studies. Nutrafol clinically tests their final formulations to ensure their efficacy. Clinical studies, 72% of men saw more scalp coverage after taking Nutrafol Men Hair Growth Supplement for 6 months. 86% of women saw improved hair growth after taking Nutrafol Women Hair Growth Supplement for 6 months. Em and I both know women who have had success with this. With the Nutrafol subscription, building a hair growth routine is simple. Purchase online, no prescription required. Automated deliveries, free shipping, keep you on track. Plus, you can save up to 20%. You'll have access to free naturopathic doctor consults, and Headspace membership is included because presumably that's underneath your hair, your head. Start your hair growth journey with Nutrafol for a limited time. Nutrafol offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com. Enter the code TMR. Find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com. Promo code TMR. That's Nutrafol.com. Promo code TMR. We'll put that in the podcast and YouTube description. Next sponsor. Matt, you may have to help me out here. Is your cat having digestive issues? Maybe they throw up. Maybe your cat is simply in need of a diet upgrade. Well, we've all been there, and you should check out our next sponsor. That is Smalls. This podcast episode sponsored by Smalls. To get 50% off your first order plus free shipping, head to smalls.com. Use our promo code MAJORITY. Smalls cat food is protein-packed recipes made with preservative-free ingredients you'd find in your fridge, and it's delivered right to your door. That's why Cats.com named Smalls their best overall cat food. My cat was loving it, but he passed away.
My cats, I got two.
So Matt got the rest of the Smalls.
It came at a right time, too, because I didn't have to go to the grocery store to pick up cat food, which I was low on at that time. And my cats usually like the really cheap stuff. They're kind of picky when I try to get them to eat healthier. They loved this stuff. I got maybe 1 pack left in the fridge, but I've been burning through it. And they have like a type of freeze-dried dry food that's interesting, and then the broth that you can squirt on it. It's very fancy type of things. My cats have been spoiled lately.
How many cats do you have?
I have 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
They both like it?
They both like it, yep. And they're picky cats.
New York Magazine called Smalls the best cat food, according to veterinarians, too. So it's super healthy for them. BuzzFeed said my cat went completely ballistic for this stuff. I don't know who BuzzFeed is. That's a publication. Smalls has, but Matt says his cats went completely ballistic for it. So, and as Matt said, Smalls also has a bunch of amazing treats and snacks you can add to your order. After switching to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvements, and that is, a few cat owners, a big deal. Do you have a particularly picky cat like Matt's? Well, Smalls has a sampler, so your cat can try everything Smalls has to offer. And the team at Smalls is so confident your cat's going to love their product, you can try it risk-free. That means they're going to refund you if your cat won't eat their food. What are you waiting for? Give the cat food they deserve. Head to smalls.com. Use promo code MAJORITY at checkout. You'll save 50% off your first order plus free shipping. It's the best offer you're going to find, but you have to use my code MAJORITY for 50% off your first order. One last time, that's promo code MAJORITY, 50% off your first order plus free shipping at smalls.com. All right, quick break. When we come back, Jackie Flynn Mogensen will be here. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland out today. I want to welcome to the program Jackie Flynn Mogensen, a reporter covering science and health at Mother Jones. Jackie, there's a lot we could probably talk about that, but let's specifically talk about the NIH. The NIH had its funding frozen. Is that right? I mean, as part of like the first wave of fund freeze that came out. Just give us a little bit of timeline because so much has happened just in the past 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, of course. First of all, thank you for having me on the show. Really excited to talk about this issue. So basically what happened before this week's funding freezes on grants and loans coming from the federal government, last week, researchers at NIH were instructed to pause communications, pause travel, and there was also a freeze to grant review panels, which a lot of researchers have been sounding the alarm about. I know it sounds kind of logistical and boring, but this is how money gets from places like the NIH to researchers at universities.
Let me just stop you here. Yeah. Will you explain to people, I mean, first I want to start with, like, what is the NIH? Like, what do they do?
That is a great question. The NIH is National Institutes of Health. They provide something like $40 billion every year to outside researchers. That's 60,000 grants a year that go out across 2,500 different institutions in every single state. And the research that they are funding has really important implications. There's been research that shows for every dollar the NIH funds, they get more than $2 back in economic activity. And so this is research on everything from cancer, diabetes, infectious disease like HIV, stuff that affects everyday Americans across the country. And so when there was a pause to reviewing new funding, these meetings take months and months to plan. And so people basically are saying that without these scheduled meetings, we're not allowed to get funding out. And so then this week, there's even a broader pause to funding, which a lot of universities are very concerned about. And so what I'm hearing from my sources is this is kind of just an all-out blackout on research that's happening right now. And it's very, very concerning and a very surreal time to be a science reporter.
I before we get into that part of the research and like sort of what we get out of that, and why it's not something, and why we feel the immediacy of that issue, as opposed to like, oh, this is something maybe 6 months down the road, or a year down the road, or 5 years down the road. But I want to talk about the communications for a moment. Like, what is the relevance of the CDC, of the NIH, of all of these health agencies not being able to communicate? And what do we mean by they're not able to communicate?
Right. Yes. So the memo that was sent out from the Trump administration essentially instructed all staff within the Department of Health and Human Services, which includes, as you mentioned, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, NIH, and the Food and Drug Administration to stop communicating publicly for the moment. And so that means social media posts, that means reports about disease outbreaks, that means public briefings. Some scientists at NIH were concerned and confused about whether or not they could still attend conferences, like giant cancer meetings of researchers where they get together to talk about the latest research. And so it's really just extremely broad and extremely concerning what the pause applies to. And beyond that, In addition to the communication and travel pause, as I reported recently, there was also a memo sent out to many people within the federal government, but we're talking about Health and Human Services, instructing staffers to report their colleagues if they are aware of any efforts to disguise DEI efforts. And so that's a whole other can of worms that has people
We're going to talk
too.
to Elie Mystal about that in a little bit. I mean, yes, the turning everybody into like a little Gestapo in the workplace is sort of a generic across the board, I guess, the edict. So in terms of this communication, in normal times, if we have the, let's say, I don't know, largest TB outbreak that we've had in the history of the country in Kansas, let's say, just hypothetically, although this is exactly the case, what would the CDC be doing differently, or what other health agencies would be doing differently? I mean, I follow enough news that I can see a report in, some Kansas newspaper, but what would the CDC, what value is it to me as an average American that these health agencies have the ability to communicate that there's a big TB outbreak?
Right. So the CDC is the primary agency tasked with reporting the cases known cases of a disease outbreak. So if there was a TB outbreak, for instance, CDC collects reports across all of the states and keeps a tally of where the outbreak is happening, how many people it's happening to, and works to help contain it, and also communicates to people about what is the actual risk of things. We saw this during COVID. CDC was having regular briefings. And so if you imagine something like, say, a pandemic occurring at a time like this, it would just be a complete disaster.
And getting back to that sort of return on investment for the NIH grants, like how does that manifest itself? I mean, like, for instance, I know that it was the National Institute on Aging, and I think the VA that did, and I just picked this one because it's the most, sort of the most popular drug right now, but did funded research on that Gila monster big lizard whose spit turns out to be like the hormone GLP-1, which is, basically Ozempic. And, there's issues obviously with Ozempic, I think, but right now it looks like it's going to both. Well, it's obviously made a ton of money for a couple of big pharmaceutical companies, but it's also going to save the U.S. money in terms of like Medicare, Medicaid, diabetes, all that kind of stuff, and all the other sort of like knock-on impact of people having weight issues. Where does this NIH funding happen in? Like, how are we going to see the impact of just even like a 3 or 4 week or month moratorium?
Yes, absolutely. So NIH invests in a lot of different research, so it's almost hard to kind of like distill it down to just a few areas. But some big impacts are patents, disease, medicine development, jobs. Those are the things that the NIH delivers in terms of economic output. It's really interesting you brought up Ozempic because one thing I had heard from researchers is that this pause is particularly concerning because research isn't exactly linear. You might be studying something like large reptiles and discover a drug like Ozempic, and that's exactly what happened in that case. And so there's a big concern that by kind of forcing people to study what the administration deems appropriate, that it will stifle innovation in all sorts of different areas. And that's one of my favorite things about science is how it's pure and it's question-based and curiosity-based. And by limiting what people can study, there's a real concern that it might limit, innovation and eventually treatments and medicines.
What is your sense? I mean, I don't know if you've been able to do too much reporting in this in terms of like downstream, but I got to think, I mean, and this applies to millions of people and then millions more, I guess, maybe who might be in school. But when people who are in some way touched by the NIH or any of this funding freeze, have you talked to people who are like, I'm not looking obviously to become a multi-millionaire by doing this research or whatever it is, but I also don't want to live with the anxiety of like, I don't know, like an actor or something, not knowing if my next gig is happening. I mean, the idea is that people like a certain amount of employment security. Have you talked to people who are like, this is making me question my entire the life's plan?
Absolutely. I have talked to people within NIH, and I've talked to people outside of NIH, just researchers at universities who are concerned about this. Within the NIH, what I'm hearing from my sources is that morale is very low. People are considering leaving. And in fact, there was an email memo sent out from the Trump administration, I believe it was yesterday or the day before, encouraging people to resign, making it easy for them to resign. And so I think there's kind of this feeling, at least within the federal government, from what I'm hearing from the people I'm talking to, of that they feel they're being demonized or their work isn't valued. And that's really tough because a lot of these folks could be making some higher salaries if they were to go into industry or come out of the federal government. Within academia, so in universities and things like that, people are also feeling this kind of morale sink, which is really concerning. I spoke to a researcher who's federally funded, but works at an outside university, who said they'd rather go into industry before they move to Florida, where they're subject to certain policies that they thought they couldn't work under those conditions. So it's
what
just
is
really
the move to Florida? What is that about?
So they basically they're based in California, and so they had said, like, I'd rather stay in California where my work is possible to do before I move to another state that has these kind of restrictive policies. In this case, the researcher I was speaking to is trans, and you can I did a report talking to a bunch of different people about concerns like this, but the kind of not just attacks on science, but attacks on identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion measures is also part of the whole picture here of why science could be impacted.
What do you have a sense looking forward, like what's the next steps of this, or are you just as much in the dark as everybody else?
So when I put out my story on NIH on Friday, there was a lot of confusion as to why the communication pause, why the travel pause, why are we putting a pause on reviewing research right now? And what's become clear in the days since that published is that the administration, from what I can interpret from their memos that have gone out to staff and reporting by journalists at the Washington Post, Times, and others, is that there is an intention to review the grants and research being done to make sure it complies with President Trump's executive orders. So those are executive orders that include de-emphasizing environmental justice and, as I mentioned, rooting out DEI efforts. And so I think there's a real concern. It's somewhat speculative at the moment that researchers who research touches DEI even a little bit might have their funding cut either now or in the future. And that's not just, measures to increase diversity. That's also people who study disparities, health disparities, and health concerns that affect the population differently. So that's very concerning.
And there's no real definition for what the Trump administration is talking about, right? Because, I mean, if you are, you're talking about researching, it seems like for whatever reason, all the oil refineries happen in low-income neighborhoods, or this is a disease. I mean, just a reminder for folks, I don't think we funded disease as it specifically impacted women until the early 90s, right? I mean, that there was no, do I have that right?
There's certainly been a lack of underfunding for health issues that affect women, certainly.
And presumably we don't do that for, across the board. We have this sort of like notion of this is a prominent disease that can strike people. But really, when we say people, what we're talking about more often than not is white men. And whether that's was on purpose or just the nature of our society, the idea is assessing those things and dealing with those deficits in the way that we provide healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a lot of chaos and confusion of what they mean by DEI, and recently in some communications have included DEIA for accessibility. And so I think people, it's honestly, maybe it's the chaos is the point in all of this. The confusion is the point, but yeah, a lot of people I've been talking to aren't sure exactly what that means. If it means their research on cancer rates across, Black women versus white women, maternal mortality, things like that will be affected. They just don't know. So that's one thing that I'm definitely staying on in the coming weeks to continue looking at.
Yeah, I think that the chaos is the point. But Jackie Flynn Mogensen, we will put a link to your piece, What the Hell is Going On at the NIH, at majority.fm and in our podcast and YouTube description. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Elie Mystal, justice correspondent at The Nation, will also tell us what the hell is going on with a bunch of the other, at least on their face, blatantly illegal moves by the Trump administration to attack our administrative state. And see if Elie has a sense of what happens next with those attacks. We'll be right back. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland out today. Pleasure to welcome back to the program Elie Mystal, justice correspondent at The Nation, who is, I think, probably just as frayed. And I got to imagine if you're looking at the legal aspects of this stuff, it's overwhelming. And it does seem to be the point, doesn't it, Elie?
Yeah, I mean, Sam, by the way, hi, thanks for having me. It's like you spend your whole life training and building up an expertise, right? You learn things, you go to the schools, and you look at this document that we call the Constitution, and it doesn't matter. There's not. It's almost like I have an existential crisis where there is nothing that I know that matters anymore, because what I know is based on a world that has rules on people that are acting with generally good faith to enforce those rules. And when none of that exists, man, I'm like a Newtonian physicist that's been dropped into the quantum realm, right? Like nothing that I know actually matters anymore. So that's part of the overwhelming part of it. I mean, and like you're saying, it's by design. This is how this orange jerk wants me to feel. Like, he wants me to feel defeated, and I'm trying not to give him that last measure of victory. But it's difficult because I can tell you, and I'm sure I'm about to, all of the ways in which everything he's done is flatly illegal. But I cannot tell you if any of that is going to matter. And that's wild.
Wasn't there and maybe this is, I can't remember, maybe the whole thing was apocryphal, but at one point, there was a famous exchange with, maybe it was Supreme Court Justice or somebody, and there was something to you and what army, or something to that effect, in terms of upholding a Supreme Court edict. I don't know what I'm thinking of.
I think you're thinking of Teddy Roosevelt disagreeing with the Supreme Court decision, and kind of Andrew Jackson disagreeing with the Supreme Court decision, basically preventing him from killing lots of Native Americans. And Jackson said the justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it.
Right. That's
and it was a straight up like, I'm the president, I'm the commander in chief, I have the army, I'm going to kill these Indians. If if a couple of judges in Washington want to come stop me, they're welcome to take up a gun and try.
Yeah,
and that was one of the few times in American history where a president just directly defied a Supreme Court order, and it didn't matter. He just killed the Native Americans.
All right, let's go through this stuff, because I think on some level, like, the dynamic seems to be the same. The only difference is that we have a handpicked Supreme Court, 6-3 Supreme Court, that I think Donald Trump feels like this is going to vindicate, his claims. Let's start with the attacks on DEIA, actually, and then work our way through the firing of the NLRB commissioner and the EEOC commissioners, disabling both those commissions or bureaus, and this whole notion of the Impoundment Control Act. Yeah. But let's start with the DEIA. I mean, first off, like, I've been reading into what the DEIA EOs were from Biden, and this is not about quotas. No. It is, and it's not all about like race or culture too. It's also about economics.
It's about economics. It's about gender. It's about enforcing the American Disabilities Act. But Sam, I have a kind of a subtle or nuanced point about this, right? Ending DEIA programs is not unconstitutional. DEIA is a policy, right? It's a policy enacted by white folks, quite frankly. It's a policy invented by white presidents, Lyndon B. Johnson being the first, with an executive order that Trump has now rescinded. It's a policy enacted by white companies and white schools. This is not a policy that Black people or women or Americans with disabilities asked for. What they asked for was the enforcement of the Civil Rights Act. What we asked for was the enforcement of the Americans with Disabilities Act. White folks decided that the best way to enforce the Civil Rights Act and the American Disabilities Act was with these programs. So now if white folks and their white president wants to rescind these programs, that's fine. That's constitutional. That's a policy decision. The question becomes, if you're not going to enforce the Civil Rights Act through these programs, are you going to enforce it, Don? What's your next plan for ending discrimination in government hiring, Don? That's the question that that people should be asking Trump. And obviously the answer is that they don't intend to enforce the Civil Rights Act. They don't intend to enforce the American with Disabilities Act. And that's where Trump's actions are illegal and unconstitutional, right? So like, it's a little bit of a bank shot here to understand that like ending DEI itself, that's not the problem. The racism and discrimination and bigotry, that's the actual constitutional problem. And that's what Trump is doing, right? So if you think about kind of a standard like workplace harassment lawsuit, right? That's in the Civil Rights Act. You cannot take hostile retaliatory actions against people based on their race. When he suspends every single person in the federal government based on them being DEIA, without even being able to define what that is, what he's doing is creating a hostile work environment for anybody Black, brown, woman, or with disabilities, or for anybody who is perceived to be Black, brown, or a person with disabilities, because it doesn't actually define what DEIA is. So that's the constitutional problem. That's the legal problem, not ending the program, but the racism and bigotry inherent in the way that he is trying to end the programs.
And so he's getting rid of the apparatus that provides for some measure of mitigating the opportunity for those problems to exist. Is that it?
Exactly. Like, again, the Civil Rights Act says that you cannot discriminate in hiring, right? The federal government is the largest employer in the country. It's also the largest employer in every single state. The federal government is supposed to be an equal opportunity employer. Now, again, you can enforce that. You can make that happen through having an equal opportunity commission. You can make the federal government an equal opportunity employer in various ways that you can come up with, right? But what you can't do is turn the federal government into a select preserve for only white cis hetero men, and that's what Trump is trying to do. The problem, Sam, and you already talked about his hand-picked Supreme Court. This Supreme Court, I don't think, believes that the Civil Rights Act should be a thing. I don't think this court believes that the Civil Rights Act should be unconstitutional. We should be constitutional. We already know that this court doesn't believe the Voting Rights Act should be constitutional. Like John Roberts spent a decade slowly eviscerating the Voting Rights Act from 2013 in Shelby County all the way through Arizona v. Brnovich, right? So like he's eviscerated the Voting Rights Act because John Roberts has decided that racism has been defeated and that holding white people accountable to it is just being mean to whites. I mean, that's John Roberts's kind of internal monologue, I believe. So I don't know that when you sue the Trump administration under the Civil Rights Act, I don't know that you're doing anything other than giving the Supreme Court an opportunity to, if not directly overturn the Civil Rights Act, certainly greatly weaken and vitiate it. And that becomes the problem with letting Republicans control the courts that you and I have been complaining about for like 10 years now.
I mean, when you, in the course of 3 or 4 days, get rid of like the parameters in which you can, as an employer, the federal government and these different agencies, where you can make sure that you're not being discriminatory at the workplace, and then you get rid of the EEOC and debilitate that, and then you get rid of the apparatus within the Department of Education to make sure that none of that's happening, and you get rid of the apparatus within the Labor Department to make sure that that's not happening, and you also just undermine the ability of unions to go get redress. If unions are looking into that, you've basically said this is really like if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound type of situation. You've basically gotten rid of all the people who are redress and making sure that this type of discrimination is not happening.
If I apply for a federal government job while black and they deny me that job because I'm black, how in the hell would I prove that now? Who in the heck would I go to now? Where would I take my claim now? Nowhere. There's nothing under the Trump administration. There is no apparatus. There is no process within the federal government to hold the federal government accountable to the Civil Rights Act. That is the legal and constitutional problem. And that is not something that Trump, MAGA people, and MAGA justices think is a problem. They think that racism in hiring should be okay.
And
that's where we are.
We should also say that is like one, I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that was the first thing that they basically, that was where they launched their first assault. But if their secondary agenda is to make the government have
White
less
again?
people working for it, I guess, I don't know what to say, like, smaller. But if I am a black person, a brown person, a woman in some instances, I mean, the head, there's some guy who's like, I think the OPM lawyer is a self-proclaimed raging misogynist.
Yes.
I'm not being facetious about this. It's just I didn't have the room to pull this story. I was holding it for another couple of days. But if I am any of these folks, if I have a physical disability, I'm looking around and going like, they're offering me a buyout. Like there's and I'm going to take it. Like this is, the first people out the door are going to be people who feel like they have made a big show of making sure that all of the guardrails to make sure that I have a modicum of respect within the context of this office have been taken away. And they just, have some 22-year-old from the Heritage Foundation is now in charge of my department. I'm out of here.
Yep. And I now report basically to Stephen Miller. And I serve at the pleasure of a racist ghoul. I'm going to take the money and leave, right? Of course, when you then go into the private sector now, the private sector companies are, they are more than happy to get rid of these programs that they never really believed in or invested in anyway. Again, I go back to the issue that DEIA was never, to me, super effective, right? Like it was never the best way to handle the problem of bigotry and racism in hiring. It was the white way to handle bigotry and racism in hiring. It's what white people were willing to do. And so, I support the programs because that's the best white people were willing to do. But I don't think those programs were necessarily the best possible solution to the problem, right? I think the best possible solution involves much more kind of accountability for racist hiring. So I always think more in terms of like firing, in having control over who's doing the hiring and firing them when they're racist, as opposed to giving them these kind of easy outs to like, well, we got our black for the day for the quarter, moving on. But this was the white solution. So getting rid of these programs, again, the programs are not what anybody that I know is fighting over. What people are fighting over are the civil rights violations and Trump's attempt to essentially undo the entire civil rights era. If you kind of go step by step through all of these programs that you're talking about, these were all spooled up in the wake of the civil rights era, right? As part of the franchise being restored to Black Americans after it had been taken away for 100 years after the end of Reconstruction, and they're just undoing it all. They're just the people who never agreed with the civil rights era have won. People put them in power, and this is top of their agenda, and so that's what we're seeing. And we should say, John Roberts, this has been a lifelong dream, 44-year-long project for him from the time when he was a young lawyer in the Reagan administration. And people keep thinking that John Roberts is a moderate, and maybe he's a moderate on international tax policy. But when it comes to racial equality, John Roberts has always been an enemy of Black people. John Roberts has always been an enemy of a pluralistic, multicultural, multi-ethnic democracy. He's never for a day believed in that. And that's where you get into the problems of Roberts now just potentially rubber stamping Trump's actions. Now, I will say one thing, one of the things that I try to remind people about the Supreme Court is that, yes, they're ideologues, yes, they're lawyers, yes, they're scholars, but they're also just people. They're also just like regular people, and they respond to regular people emotions and issues. And one of the things that I have learned that the Supreme Court generally doesn't like is to be treated like an afterthought, to be treated like they're already bought and paid for, even when they're already bought and paid for. And Trump's bluster here bespeaks of a man who thinks that the Supreme Court is already in his pocket.
Rubber stamp it, yeah.
Right? And that, again, at a interpersonal level, that might rankle some of the justices. And that might cause him problems down the road. But the other thing, Sam, and I think this is why it's so important to bring up the buyouts, let's assume in the kind of best case scenario that many or most of these orders or attempts to get rid of the Civil Rights Act fail. They'll fail eventually in the best case scenario, but that's eventual court order is going to come too late for thousands and thousands and thousands of federal workers who will have already been fired, who will already have been placed on leave, who maybe will have already taken buyouts because they don't want to work in a hostile work environment. And so just by doing this, even if it's eventually ruled illegal and unconstitutional, Trump has already won his goal of menacing and harassing Black, brown, women, and disabled Americans throughout the federal government. And there will be people who lose their jobs over this who will never come back.
I mean, the goal, just to quote Russell Vogt, who's is going to end up be the OMB, is to traumatize the federal workers. And, they'll have a couple of different flavors of how they're going to try and traumatize people. But this is step one. I mean, if I'm a federal worker and in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whenever it is, the Supreme Court says, yeah, you can't do this, I'm just going to be like, okay, well, what's the next thing they're going to do? Mm-hmm. Like, there's no, the they can keep them from doing this one tactic, but where's to enjoin them from doing the next tactic? Like where, we need to move. We're all relocating to, the desert in Arizona. That's where my agency's going.
Right? Like there's
there's anything wrong with the desert in Arizona, but I mean, if I live somewhere else,
it's a dry heat, right?
It's a dry heat.
There's all kinds of petty, like, I've got to remember, this is one of Trump himself is probably one of the most petty people we've ever had in the White House. His entire administration is beset by small, cowardly, petty men. And so you got to think about what that kind of pettiness, how that plays out on the ground in the kind of office space situation, right?
Right.
We're talking about people who are going to be like, who are going to lose their staplers, right? We're talking about people who are going to be placed in a back office, given the crappiest version of work. And just, again, the whole point of the hostile work environment suit. Hostile work environment is not just somebody coming up to you and be like, hey, N-word, how you doing? That's not it. Like, that's part of it, right? But there are all sorts of different ways a hostile work environment can take place. One of the ways that I don't, and Sam, because your viewers don't know, I play a lot of video games. And so when Blizzard got sued, Blizzard, the makers of World of Warcraft, got sued, I read every bit of that lawsuit. And some of the allegations in that lawsuit about the practices and Blizzard's offices, one thing really stood out to me about how the male coworkers would go into the fridge and drink the breast milk stored and pumped there by their female colleagues who had just come back from maternity leave. And I was like, that's so disgusting, right? But it's the definition of a hostile work environment, right? It's the definition of making somebody's job untenable just by your male bro behavior. And so when I think about what's going to happen to these federal workers, for whatever reason, I think about the breast milk guy, right? I think about, like, those are the guys that Trump is appointing. Those are the guys that Trump is hiring. And those are the guys who think that they are now untouchable and can do whatever they want to their black coworkers or female coworkers or disabled coworkers.
Let's talk about yesterday's illegal thing. Now, I got to get more specific because there was multiple. The unprecedented firing of a National Labor Relations Board commission member, that's never happened without cause and without even claiming cause. Again, this shuts down the labor board. It needs a quorum to function. Same with the EEOC. But people that Trump appointed to the EEOC, like this time around, they really know they have planned for this. But let's talk about the Impoundment Control Act. We played a clip of Donald Trump in 2023. Basically outlining what he was going to do. This came from Russell Vogt. It came from the Project for 2025. This is almost like foundational. There are two things, it seems to me. The Schedule F, get rid of all the civil servants. And the other is essentially defund whatever he wants to, despite congressional appropriation. Hopefully, I think by now, over the past 2 days, this audience knows that the 1974 Impoundment Control Act and the Train v. New York City cases, more or less around the same time, I think it was, both as a matter of the Supreme Court precedent established this and the statutory presence of it. And then, of course, just like an OLC memo in 1988 and also the Constitution, which says appropriation. We now know what that means. What is Trump banking? Is this just like we're going to make things very, very difficult for people as part of like getting, people to quit? Or do they think that the Supreme Court, have they teed this up? Like you watch cases, and for people who don't know, Elie will look at like little threads that build over the course of a decade or 8 years or 5 years. Somebody says the major questions doctrine 15 years ago, and people are just like, what the hell is that? And Elie's got that on his bulletin board and waits for it to come up again. And then all of a sudden becomes the law of the land. What's your sense of how they're going to respond to this?
Right. So I want to do both of those stories at the same time, right? Because the firing of the commissioners, that is something that's been building within Supreme Court conservative doctrine for a very long time. It's called the unitary executive theory, and it's this idea that the executive branch is just one person, the President of the United States, in this case, Donald Trump, and he can do whatever he wants throughout the executive branch with basically no other outside control, no congressional control, whatever. He can do whatever he wants. Everybody in the executive branch serves at his pleasure is the thought behind the unitary executive theory. And so the Supreme Court has been pushing that for quite a while, and they will let him get away with firing the NLRB guy and firing the EEOC guy. I just believe that they shouldn't, but I think they will. This Impoundment Act crap, that's a little different. Not only are we, as you pointed out, in direct violation of statutes and Supreme Court precedent, we are in direct violation now of the constitutional appropriation power, right? Like that is clearly given to Congress. And when we talk about things like major questions doctrine and, the Chevron deference and all those other things, all the conservatives are saying it under the guise of Congress has this power, the executive doesn't, right? So for them to kind of turn around and say Congress has the power, the executive doesn't, to determine how to enforce the laws and blah, blah, blah. But the president has the power and Congress doesn't to spend the money appropriated by Congress. I'm not saying that the Supreme Court doesn't have the craven hypocrisy to do it. I'm saying that it would be such a left turn, right? It would be such
it would be so craven and hypocritical. It would probably be one of the most, because all of that Chevron doctrine is basically Congress doesn't have has the ultimate authority and cannot even, in some respects, delegate a broad mandate to the executive. They need to be very specific about it. And to say that on one hand, and to say that when Congress is specific about giving money, actually what they're saying is that's just the ceiling. You can go from zero to whatever they say in terms of funding it. That would be just absolutely right. There'd be no law left.
So if anything, I'm more worried about this case getting up to the Supreme Court and the conservatives using it to strengthen their bullcrap major questions doctrine, to strengthen their anti-Chevron deference doctrine, to actually strengthen their view that courts, not Congress or the president, controls everything in terms of the interpretation of law, right? So I don't think the court will go for him. And my bigger worry is that the court, in going against him in a decision that will be praised by liberals who just don't like Trump, that the court will insert really dangerous and ultimately unenforceable language into that opinion that then gives us problems 5, 10, 15 years down the road, while everybody celebrates it because in the immediate term it's stopping Trump, right? So that's kind of my intellectual worry. But here's the other thing, Sam, and this is kind of what I was trying to say at the beginning of our segment. I can tell you that what Trump is doing with the funding is illegal. Right. I can tell you that the Supreme Court is probably going to overturn it. Who's going to turn the money back on? Right. You were talking about how federal workers might take a buyout because they don't know what Trump's going to do next. Do you know how many organizations and institutions are reliant on federal funding that has now been randomly cut off? There are schools, HBCUs, that if this stands up for more than a couple of weeks, will not be able to make payroll because their federal assistance has been cut off, to say nothing of the thousands, potentially millions of people who will not be able to put food on their table if federal assistance is cut off. We're kind of focused on the domestic stuff, but remember, this also applies internationally.
Yeah.
Trump has ended HIV protocols
and
globally. So people are literally going to get their HIV medicine today and don't have it because of this random crap that Trump did yesterday. So when you think about the full scope of what's been frozen, a Supreme Court order a month and a half from now saying, like, actually, that order was wrong, still requires somebody to turn the money back on.
I've got some good news.
Go ahead.
Breaking 10 minutes ago. The White House Budget Office, according to Jeff Stein, has officially rescinded the order authorizing a federal freeze on grants. Now, I say this I say this with a certain amount of trepidation because in 20 minutes we could read like, well, actually, not exactly, and so I have a feeling it's going to be one of those deals. But
it's good for Tennessee State to make payroll right now. But I actually went over on Blue Sky. I was talking about this yesterday. One of the actual problems here with sustaining a lawsuit against these actions is, as we just saw, they change every day. They change every minute, right? And so, like, how do you sue? How do you have, for all the, the stupid legal jargon terms, how do you establish standing? How do you establish rightness? How do you establish mootness when you're suing against a policy that is changing by the minute?
Right.
And because it's so generally vague, at any moment you can go to court and say, like, Trump can't do this, and then Trump can say, like, I never said I was going to do that, and you're like,
or we stop doing that and we're just doing something different, and then you got to go back and restart the whole process again.
Do not pass go, do not collect $200. You got to go all the way back to the start, right? So, like, that's also part of the chaos, and that's the entire point of all of this. It's It's succeeding in creating chaos. It's succeeding in creating an environment where people do not know what's going to happen tomorrow. And that means some of the stuff will fall through the cracks.
And frankly, it is all about making a hostile work environment for everybody associated with the federal, for America. I mean, really, like, from every entity that relies in some fashion on the federal government operating as it should, which is, really everybody. And, short of, like, there's some very wealthy people who operate outside of those things, and all the aspects of the federal government are largely encumbrances, except for their, the FAA, and so that they can fly into their private airports and whatnot. Let me just, the way that I deal with this is to,
drink.
Drink, as you know. We've spent a little time doing that in the past. But drink and then over-intellectualize as a way of separating myself from my emotions. So when you talk about, like, and again, this is hypothetical, but tomorrow they could just, actually, no, we rescind our rescission, and they just could do this like every day, every other day, Tuesdays and Thursdays we have cut funding. Monday, Wednesday, Friday we haven't. When you worry about, like, that decision that on its face would appear to stop Trump from doing something like this, but basically plants a seed or further cultivates some vine or growth essentially within the law as to debilitate the federal government down the line, what does that look like?
Well, it looks like a situation where the Democrats, should they ever get their heads out of their ass and be able to win another election, it creates a situation where the Democrats cannot undo by executive order all the stuff that Trump did do by executive order. You see, like, if Trump's spaghetti at the wall, feces at the wall, just like a monkey's just throwing stuff, right? And it's going to be incumbent, if he ever loses power, if the Democrats ever take power, to undo a bunch of the stuff that he did, right? But if the court says, because we stopped, policies A, C, and 18 from Trump, that means we can stop all policies from whoever, Gavin Newsom. You see,
it's a power grab by the Supreme Court, because they're not necessarily
to preserve the parts of Trumpism they like, but get rid of the parts of Trumpism they don't like, and debilitate the ability of Democrats to go back in and undo it all. But again, even that kind of worry is incumbent upon the Democrats, being allowed to have a free and fair election again, which I'm not sure that we will. The Democrats being allowed to win a free and fair election again, which I'm not sure we'll be allowed to do. And then the Democrat who wins the free and fair election sometime in the future actually doing something and actually spending all of their time using their power maximally to undo the Trump crap. I am still, it's funny, we're talking about the firing of the NLRB guy and the EEOC guy. Maybe I'm fighting the last war, but like Joe Biden got in and we didn't fire anybody, right? We didn't fire Chris Wray. We didn't fire Louis DeJoy. Like we didn't fire anybody. But Trump is out here, firing people who didn't even do anything wrong just because they represent something that he doesn't like. He's firing people left and right. Whereas when the Democrats come in, it's all about turning the page and looking forward, not backward, and twirling. Like that's all we freaking do. Right. And so at some level, as much as I hate what I'm seeing with Trump, as much as I despise him and his entire, I hate him as a man, as a record label, and as an institution, like this is what it looks like to use power maximally. And if Democrats ever have the opportunity to have power again, they better use it maximally.
Yep. And I guess it just, on that Supreme Court thing, the very sort of like ham-fisted version of this is just as we said Trump could not infringe upon the Empowerment and Control Act, we can't also, this court also decides that Medicare for all, that is not, you can't have that. Right. By the same hocus pocus.
Right. You can't have Medicare for all. You can't have, we basically have gotten rid of the Commerce Clause. And remember, and you can't enforce the Civil Rights Act because, right, it'll be, if you can end DEI by executive order, but now if you're trying to push it back through by executive order, no, that violates the civil, that's unconstitutional because the 14th Amendment actually is there for white people, first and foremost. Like they're almost
there's a myriad of ways of them basically forming that as a protective shield and making sure that this stuff never comes back.
Right. So it's just I've already been warning Democrats, when the Supreme Court starts releasing these decisions, especially the ones that go against Trump, read them very carefully.
Because they're laying seeds for preventing any type of like
even
reinstitution of this
Trump,
stuff.
Never forget that the court is not on your side.
Elie?
Yeah, it's been 10 days.
I was going to say, I didn't think we would get to this point for another at least 65 days or so, but here we are. Hope springs eternal.
I mean, look, people spring eternal, right? Like, I keep coming back to this. White people voted for this. A majority of white people voted for this, and large minorities of Latinos, and other racial and ethnic groups voted for this. A third of people stayed home and didn't vote at all. And so now people are getting what they asked for, and I hope they don't like it. I hope they don't like it.
I worry that we don't really have a connection, that there hasn't been enough done by, Chuck Schumer gets up and says, like, you're defunding the police. I feel like that's a little bit insufficient for the moment. Maybe there's a reason why, if the leader of the Democratic Party, right? He's the leader of the Democratic Party right now. He's the most senior Democratic leader we have, is not explaining to people the relationship between government operating and things that impact them on a daily basis, except for the police.
Democrats really have to wean themselves off of wordplay as if that is good politics, right? They have to really get over themselves, that like turning them around on them like doesn't freaking matter. Nobody cares that you're now using one of their lines against them. They care that Trump is using power and Democrats seem powerless to stop him. It's Chuck Schumer saying, now you're defunding the police.
What
it's
percentage?
Hakeem Jeffrey saying, but God is still on the throne. Really? Is he? I can't see him. Like,
right.
Like we've got to stop with these word games and start with actual resistance games, right? So like one of the things that I keep saying, and we've seen this from a lawsuit from the Quakers, actually, with ICE going into churches, Quakers saying that is a violation of their First Amendment rights. I don't want Chuck Schumer standing on the Senate floor talking about, well, this thing with birthright citizenship, that's really bad. I want Chuck Schumer standing in the National Cathedral with 100 undocumented migrants behind him and saying, come get me. Come get me. Come arrest me, Trump, and we'll have our little court case. That's the kind of fight that I want to see from Senate Democrats and elected officials, not word games where we play gotcha with their own, turning their own words and phrases back on them.
It's just stunning to me. I wonder if that 1/3 that stayed home, the reason why was because they felt there wasn't enough police on the streets. I suspect that's not the case. But Elie Mystal, we will, assuming we're both here, in the next couple of months, we will check in with you again. Good luck. I imagine there's going to be a lot of gaming in your future, to cope.
A lot of gaming and a lot of like reading really bad briefs designed by the Trump administration. I mean, as an aside for your listeners, trust me, one of the worst things about my life is that the next Solicitor General, the person who has to argue these cases in front of the administration, and so a person that I'll have to spend hours and hours listening to, is John Sauer, who not only was Trump's lawyer for the immunity case, not only is he a horrible VetSoc person, he's the guy that sounds like this. He's got that problem with his throat. It's like, I listen to this man for hours talking like this about crap, and it's gonna drive me insane.
All right, well, good luck. To tell you, man, hang in there. Appreciate it.
I'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye. Elie Mystal, folks. We will link obviously to his piece in The Nation. You should read Elie. His take on things is going to be increasingly relevant. I mean, it has been. I don't know what to say. It's a stressful time for people who have to sort of both take the legal system seriously and also be aware that in many respects, it is a fiction that is a function of some very bad people's whims. Whim may be a little bit loose, but just desire. I don't mean to sound like it isn't something that they haven't been, John Roberts this is his life's work, and it's all worked out for him in a way that's going to be very unfortunate for the rest of us. Folks, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajority.report.com. When you do, you not only get the free show free of commercials, but you get the fun half, which, we'll try. Some days are going to be more fun than others. I don't know what to tell you. Also, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, hot chocolate. Use coupon code majority, get 10% off. Bradley, what's happening on ESVN?
So there's no football games this weekend. So Em and I'll be off tomorrow, actually. But we will be back on Monday for just to do some recapping of any headlines that come out from the weekend, the off weekend, and heading into the Super Bowl next weekend. And we will be back next Thursday as well for our final pick segment to decide who wins our season-long picks competition. So youtube.com/ESPN to check out our ESPN show to check out our prior episodes and clips.
Let's just pop this up. Matt, why don't you tell us what's happening on Left Reckoning while you get this memo?
Yeah, Left Reckoning last night. I had a giant show with Grace Blakely from the UK talking about the economy, and Asal Rad talking about foreign policy, Biden and Trump, and also Neil Meyer talking about the Democrats trying to grow populist spine every time they take a shellacking and how it might be straining credulity at this point. So check that out, patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
This is a memo from the Executive Office of the President, Office of Management and Budget. Memorandum for heads of executive departments and agencies dated January 29th, 2005. That is 2025. That is today. This is from Matthew J. Vase. He is the acting director of the Office of Management and Budget. Subject, rescission of Memo 2513. This one that we're looking at is Memo 2514. OMB Memorandum M2513 is rescinded. If you have questions about implementing the president's executive orders, please contact your agency general counsel.
Never mind.
Sorry about that. I'll tell you something. Honestly, this has got to be memed, right? Like for everything that you've decided to do a 180 on the next day.
The UK calls them U-turns, and it like is the number one thing that they can lock on to. Like if a politician does a U-turn, I guess we call it flip-flopping over here. Yeah, it's like it can get people to understand things in a way that like the actual policy doesn't.
Flop.
Doesn't matter like if the policy you're at currently is good. It's that if you flip-flopped or U-turned or not.
Flip-flop. All right, folks. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what? A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland is off today. We'll turn on the phones in a bit. I want to play this clip. We should say yesterday, my understanding is that SNAP payments were not frozen yesterday. And as of a couple, I don't know, a couple moments ago, the freezing on federal grants was rescinded. Now, not necessarily the NIH grants or some of the other health grants. Let's just be clear. The chaos is the point. I keep reiterating this, but Russell Vought, the head of the OMB, the guy who basically came up with the one of the core agendas of Project 2025, who worked for Trump in the last term, is going to